Wherever there are shadows, there are people ready to kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. This is Bleeding Daylight with your host, Rodney Olsen.
Welcome to Bleeding Daylight. Thanks for being here. A full library of episodes is waiting for you at bleedingdaylight.net. You'll also find all our social media links there. Please follow Bleeding Daylight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. Something different today as we revisit an episode from several years ago that tells the story of a shared experience I had with my guest. We were thousands of kilometres from home. Our lives were in danger and we were ultimately both changed forever. Get ready to hear some behind-the-scenes details of some life-defining moments. A number of years ago, while I was working as a morning radio presenter in Perth, Western Australia, I travelled to Haiti with 3 other Christian radio presenters from other parts of Australia. The trip was organised through Compassion Australia and was designed to give us a first-hand look at their excellent work releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. Today's episode is an edited version of a Bleeding Daylight episode from several years ago with Az Hamilton, who was one of the other radio presenters that went on that trip. Az is now pastoring a church alongside his wife. Our original episode was almost an hour long. I wanted to reduce the length of the episode and improve the quality of some of the audio where possible. I do hope you enjoy the result. Let's jump in, and let me begin by saying, Az, welcome to Bleeding Daylight.
Mate, thanks so much for having me on your show.
We were both working in radio at the time. We travelled to Haiti and it was through radio that we were both introduced to Compassion's work. Can you remember those radio days learning about Compassion?
It was through radio I sponsored my first child. So I was about 4 years into that whole getting to know about Compassion, and then obviously we got invited as radio announcers to go on this trip. I think I was 22, 23. I was pretty unorganised. I didn't even know where Haiti was. I remember after being to the doctor to get my injections when he was saying, don't go, you're going to die, like you probably should cancel this trip. I looked up on a map where Haiti was. For me, being a young bachelor, it was just like, oh, I'm getting 2 weeks off work. This is pretty cool. I get to travel. I haven't done much international travel. So when I rocked up to Sydney and met you guys, to be totally honest, I actually had no expectation for this trip, except that I knew I was getting off my show for a couple of weeks. That was pretty much me. And that's probably as naive as you possibly can get before traveling to somewhere like Haiti.
Once we get to Haiti, things start to change. And I remember the very first morning after we had arrived in Haiti and had travelled up towards our hotel and all wide-eyed seeing what was going on. And we got up the next morning and there were these meetings going on. There were discussions happening. And tell me a little about that.
It's interesting how you have different people's perspectives of a trip. I remember sitting on the outside of them. There was just a lot of whispers, whisper, oh, what's going on? But I was the young guy, oh yeah, whatever, we're going, whatever. I do remember them saying something about we're not going to some region. We're going to change the area we're going to. There's been a little bit of unrest in the streets. I remember the word unrest was used a few times, a little bit of unrest. But don't worry, a bit of unrest. The things that stood out to me was that when we rocked up to our hotel, there were people with weapons out the front. There was armed guards. I thought that was quite unique to go to a hotel and there's armed guards. And one of the guys from Compassion said, this is where you'll be staying. If you stay inside the walls, you should be safe. Why are there guards? Well, you know, this is a hotel. I don't really comprehend this. But yeah, obviously the next day there were all these meetings about, it's been a bit of unrest. We're going to a different project. That was it. You know, I was like, okay, no worries. Didn't even think much more of it. I don't know, what were you thinking?
I really didn't know what was going on. I think a bit like you, I was kind of on the outside of those conversations. There was 4 of us from different radio stations in Australia had travelled to Haiti to see the work that Compassion was doing so that we could head back to Australia and be able to tell those stories. So, of course, we needed to go and visit the projects, as you say, connected with local churches. And you're right, they did use terms that would suggest that nothing much going on, but we'd better not go there. And so we're thinking, okay, if that's the case, we'll just sort of relax a bit and we'll go to a different place with no idea of what was about to unfold. And I don't think we still had any idea until it really did begin to unfold. And maybe you've got a perspective on when you first realised that things weren't as they should be.
everyone has a life story that changes the trajectory of their life. And I think that morning, that fateful morning where there's been some unrest in the streets, impacted me on multiple levels. Everyone remembers things differently. I remember things like rocking up to the project. There was hundreds of kids in this school jammed into this room. It was very basic, but the kids were so happy to see us. Obviously, I had my dreadlocks. The kids wanted to plait them, and so that was pretty overwhelming. I remember feeling deeply personally that I think, man, I'm a rubbish human being. I complain about so much stuff. These kids are really living very basic, simple lives, and somehow they've found joy in this moment. And I remember we hung out at the school and we looked at some of the stuff that Compassion was doing, and that was all very impressive. And I don't know who told you, Rodney, in this time, but one of the guys from Compassion came up to me, whispered in my ear, as we need to go, there's been some unrest, we need to go now. That was the moment. It's like, oh, okay, sure. We were sort of all, bye kids, and we found ourselves in our vehicle. What were you doing or thinking? How did you even find out we had to leave?
I distinctly remember where there was radio people, we needed to record interviews. And so we had our recording devices. We'd interviewed some of the kids through a translator, and we were told that some of the parents were going to turn up. And that when they turned up, that we could interview them to let them tell us what the impact of Compassion on their family was. And yet parents were turning up, taking kids straight away. And I remember them saying they're wanting to take their children home. They feel safer there. And we realized that something was not right. And then we spent a fair bit of time just in the office talking over what happens in the program rather than just spending time out there with the kids. And then they said, yeah, we need to go.
I remember we got to the point where we had to leave in the 2 four-wheel drive vehicles. I do remember that I was in the vehicle. I'm pretty sure I was in one of the vehicles it was like a ute-style tray, 4-wheel drive. And we had another vehicle go ahead of us. It's a bit of a blur, this next bit for me. I do remember we were driving down towards where we'd come from. And I remember people from the local community coming out of their sort of side alleys and out of their homes, sort of just pleading with our driver, go back, it's not safe. You can see on their faces, this is not good. Something's not right, and we didn't really know what was going on. Obviously, the Compassion staff were trying to protect us from as much as they could, like try to keep us calm, and they did an amazing job because I remember our drivers turned around at one point and went in a different direction, and then I remember going down that direction, and then it happened again. I do remember the driver, and he's like, no worries, we'll find another way. We'll go to the office. And it was very much like, okay, we're changing all our plans. We're going to take you to the Compassion office in the middle of town. It's going to be safer there. That's when everything just sort of got out of hand and crazy. Is that how you remember it? What was going on, and how do you remember that exact same sort of process of getting from this project into town in the heart of what we're about to see?
I believe we were trying to head back to the hotel. They had decided that rather than visiting another program, which was originally on the agenda, that it was safer to just go back to the hotel. So we were supposedly heading back to the hotel. But in the meantime, as you say, we changed direction, and streets that we'd gone down before now had barricades, and it was just not safe. And as we turned onto that main street that would have led us to the hotel, that's when I remember people running down towards where we were with fear in their faces saying, do not go up there. And that's when we went through the gates of the Compassion office and went inside, and then things got real.
What I remember is getting to that main point before the people were running at us, and we were on that main road in the heart of town. It was like the main street of Port-au-Prince. And there was no one around. It was like it looked like a bomb had gone off, just like the burnt rubbish up the sides of the roads. Because instantly, as soon as we hit that main road, I felt like I was in some kind of movie reel. It felt like something I'd never seen. It was like, this is not real, because there was fires. It felt eerily quiet where we were driving. And I remember Eduardo just slamming on the accelerator, like whiplash in the back, like just takes off. And yeah, we landed probably a couple of minutes later, idling out the front of those big metal gates of Compassion. And as you just mentioned, people running at us saying you can't go further down. There was a group of guys that had machetes that ran up behind our vehicle, and they stole some stuff out of the back of our tray. I think it was like some drinks or soft drinks or some water bottles or whatever. And they just sort of took off, and we were all just waiting for these gates to open. I remember it seemed like an eternity. I know that one other guy, in the car, one of the other announcers, he was really emotional because he could see what was coming towards us from down this main road, just sort of seeing a mob of people way down the other end of the road coming towards us in some kind of march or riot or something. And we're sitting in the car. We can't move because the compassion staff, they'd already shut these gates because they knew it was coming. And we're kind of calling them and saying, let us in. And they're trying to move cars around. It was just one of those very time stands still, but everything's moving at a very rapid pace. And as the gates opened, I remember we went in, they shut the gates really quickly. And all I remember was, come with us, be very quiet. And it was just very much about move fast. And we just followed these staff into this office building. And that's sort of what I remember to that point. These are the points that sort of stick to my memory that I can play over in the mind. You know, you see it over and over and over again, and it's sort of seared to the memory bank. What was the memories in that moment for you?
As I mentioned, those people running down the street towards us with fear in their faces. And that was because there was that group, as you mentioned, that was further up the street coming down. And so they were wanting to get out of their way, and they were warning us to be away as well. And that's when we did get through those gates eventually and went upstairs. Then we stood at a very high window, which seemed to be untouchable for us, but we were at a very high window and started peering out and seeing some of those people come down the street, some of them with bits of wood and other instruments.
Metal pipes, all sorts of weaponry that they could find, whether it be a machete. I don't think there was a lot of guns. It was more just like, what do I pick up? And I'm just trashing stuff. They say that, you know, your memories are connected to emotions. So clearly my emotions were at an all-time high. I remember peeking through the blinds because we were peeking through the blinds. We were very high up in an office building. And I remember feeling exactly the same as you. We're safe now. We're in this office. As long as we stay here, we'll be fine. They can't see us. It was a very surreal experience. A few hundred, maybe 1,000 odd people marching through the streets, sort of past our building. They just kept on sort of walking past, and they were screaming something. They were chanting something. And if anything was in their way, they were just breaking it or smashing it. For me, the most defining moment, at one stage, these guys have gone past our building, and I must admit I felt a sense of relief that they've passed. They're gone. We've dodged this bullet in a sense. For me, the worst possible thing happens. I remember there was a rioter who passed our building, who was just part of this sort of, you know, riot protest. And I reckon he was about 19 years of age, 20 years of age. He was only a young Haitian guy. And I remember him stopping in the middle of the road and just looking back at our building, like looking up at our building. I was standing directly next to a guy named Dan, who was from Sydney. If you've ever had one of these moments where you lock eyes with someone, oh my gosh, they can see us. Literally, like in a sheer moment of panic, saying to Dan, and this is the succession of how I remember things. I remember saying to Dan, they can see us, which was something that I didn't think was possible, how high we were. And Dan was a very level-headed guy. And he was like, as we're pretty high up, I don't think they can see us from down there. But I'm sure I was locking eyes with this guy, unless he was looking past me. Maybe he was one of those, you wave to someone and they're actually waving at the person behind you. But I remember feeling like, no, they can see us right now. And Dan kept trying to reassure me, we're pretty high up, as it's not that bad. And then it was within a split second or two, one of the compassion staff members says, it's probably not safe to be near the glass. Let's go to another room. As we turned around, that's when everything just went pear-shaped. I remember the massive explosion in the room, glass just shattering, and we've all hit the deck.
We were reminded, hey, look, it's probably not safe to be there. Step back. And it was just as we stepped back that there was this huge sound. Now, I don't know what you thought it was in the moment. I still can't be sure what I thought of in the moment, what it was. But I know that certainly some in the room thought it was a gunshot. We didn't know, but everyone dropped to the ground as glass started to shatter around the room. We later found out it wasn't a gunshot, but it was still pretty frightening.
Rocks had come smashing through the windows, and they just completely obliterated one of the entire front windows. But I remember thinking the same thing. Did we get shot at? As soon as that glass hit and we were on the ground, it was panic stations. I mean, the staff were like, get up, go. And we were running through the back of this office block. We found ourselves bolt locking a door into a small office where the staff were now telling us, hey, the people have seen us and we're not sure if they'll turn on our building. We've got one computer. You can write an email to someone you love. That was just such a terrifying but definitive moment of this is real. You got to write something to someone you love. This might be the last thing that you write, but the people have definitely seen us, and we don't know what that mob is going to do outside, whether they're going to try and take down a gate, come into our building, but now we're just locked in a room and we're going to do our thing.
It was a very scary moment, as you say. We're in a back room, and for part of that, we had some local compassion people that were with us, but most of them, those who were kind of higher ranking, were off in another room trying to sort out what it was that they thought that we should do, what it was that maybe needed to be done to secure our safety, not just for us, but for everyone there. We've talked about there being rioting people and all the rest. Maybe you can give us a bit of an understanding of why there were riots in the street.
Obviously, we got out. We were being evacuated. We were waiting in the airport, and we started asking questions because they were chanting in their own language. They were saying something over and over, and they were yelling and screaming. I remember watching on the news, seeing the president pleading with the people, please calm down. The food prices have gone through the roof on this little island called Haiti. And it's only a couple of hours away from Miami on a flight, so it's not far at all. Because the food prices have gone through the roof and the cost of living had gone up, and they were earning the equivalent of $2 American a day, there was a massive food shortage, and the people who were rioting was literally chanting, somebody help us, our children are dying. I remember this statement when they told us what they were saying. One of the statements was, our stomachs feel like they're being eaten by acid. Please help us. It was only after we got out of Haiti, I went and did a lot more research on what they meant by that. And throughout so many of the rural communities, kids were known to eat these mud pies, which were literally just soil mixed with sugar and oil, dried in the sun. They were like mud pies, and the kids would eat them. The parents would say, eat this, at least your stomach will feel full. And I think the stat back then was something like 1 in 6 children on the island wouldn't even make it to their 5th birthday. The atrocity and the nightmare of Haiti for these people became extremely real for me in that sort of 24-hour evacuation process. It changed me.
This is in the setting of 2008. It's the time of the global financial crisis, which, as you say, raises the price of even the most basics of food. So it was the global food crisis at that time. And this is what the people were rioting about. They couldn't feed their children and having to eat mud because they wanted to put something in their kids' stomach, but they had nothing to give them. It was one of those things that was a defining moment where I decided I've got to do something about this. You mentioned that we've got to the airport, and this is some of the discussion that we're having. But that trip to the airport, this is the following morning. We'd been in the compassion office. The rock had come through the window. Finally, the streets were calm. We made our way back to the hotel. And as we're going, we're seeing all these buildings that had been absolutely destroyed and looted by people just looking for food for their families. Spent a night at the hotel. And then there was the trip to the airport. Tell us about that.
We get back to the hotel, which was crazy in itself. I remember the radio station from Brisbane, my boss calling me, getting through, saying, can we send in helicopters? How do we get you out? And I'm like, you don't understand. Because on the news that night, they were cancelling all flights in and out of Haiti. There was all this sort of discussion. We don't even know if we can get a flight tomorrow. So it was really interesting. And I do remember them saying, we're going to leave super early in the morning because when it comes to a community like this, often throughout the day, the riots and the protests get larger and larger as the people kind of keep on coming together. So if we can get away early, we should be able to avoid the mobs, get you to the airport. There was one plane out that they were trying to get us on. I remember leaving early. It seemed peaceful and quiet in the streets. It just seemed like, yep, we'll be able to get to the airport. And then in, a matter of minutes, it happens again. We are confronted by a bunch of people running at our car, and they're saying, you can't go through there. The road's been blocked off further down the road. It's not safe. Our driver is once again trying to keep, our spirits up. No worries. We'll go back to the hotel. And I remember we turned around. It must have been a half an hour period of time. We're heading back towards the hotel because I think they sort of went, let's just abandon getting to the airport at this time. The problem was at the other end of this main road, they'd barricaded that end as well. So we found ourselves caught between two of these riots, or two of these barricaded protests, which were just highly dangerous. People were being killed in the streets as well the day before. Everything was being obliterated. I remember Eduardo saying it, no one will find another way. Like, it's amazing how some people just have the ability to go, I know my reality, but I'm just going to stay positive because these people just need to get out and I'm going to find a way. Here we are now finding ourselves driving down a part of the city, through an area in this city that probably you normally wouldn't go, in this sort of slum sort of area. I remember we're weaving through these little roads and it was just getting more and more congested with people. There was people sort of peering into our vehicles, getting closer up to the vehicles, until it got to a point where we're in the heart of a slum. And I just remember the words, it was sort of broken English. It was like, no way out, no way out. That's the moment, probably for me, in this trip at the age of 23, 24, or whatever I was, I can't remember, somewhere around that I'm genuinely thinking to myself, this is the day that I die. Like, this is it. I know what happens now. I've always dealt with tragedy with humor. You know, if I fall over, I laugh. Like, I just have this way of dealing with things. And I remember thinking, having this weird comedy playing out in my head about my own sister back in Australia, because before I left, as a joke, I went and got life insurance for like $1 million. And when they said, who's it going to go to? I said, give it all to my sister because it'll make my brother really annoyed. Like, it was just an in-joke amongst siblings. And in my head, as I'm thinking I'm going to die, I'm thinking about how my sister's going to be cashed up and my brother's going to wonder why he didn't get anything in the will. Like, how ridiculous is that? Like, that's what is going through my head, with people surrounding our vehicles, leaning in, pushing in up against the glass, saying there's no way out. I remember just feeling like this sort of, oh, as you're such an idiot, why'd you do that? And, oh, I'm going to die now.
It's interesting, those times and the memories that they bring back. I do recall sitting in the car thinking that if this all goes as wrong as it's likely to go, if the doors of the car happen to open and I was looking around for places that we could run to and then slam ourselves behind these metal gates in different places, how can we stay safe? We were in a place where the cars just had to stop because there were so many people around us. And there was a guy with a metal bar, and he was trying to incite the crowd to actually attack us until someone, and we only had this translated to us afterwards, but someone in the crowd looked at the vehicle, pointed to the Compassion logo on the side and said, wait, they're from Compassion.
They help the children.
They help our kids. Let them go. And that's the only reason we're still alive.
It's actually crazy. I do remember that guy. I remember being terrified by the fact that there was a real sense of let's overthrow these vehicles, and good reason for it too. I think we had two vehicles full of these Aussies that had money, had equipment that was worth money, and you've got an absolute desperate situation. We were an option to maybe be a solution for a few families to survive a little bit longer. I remember the first vehicle got through somehow, and they were waiting for us to come through. And that's when there was this sort of overthrow of the people saying, no, don't let them through. The other vehicle can go. There was somehow someone in the crowd identified they work with Compassion. They help the children, let them through. The doors opened again for us to get through and get out. I just remember waiting for our vehicle to go through. I thought, oh, we're going to get out of this. We're going to see some opportunity to get through this crowd, because there was such a thick crowd surrounding our vehicles. And it was just because of this one person, this one guy who somehow convinced the crowd, let them through. And I remember the picture of the people just opening up, like the road just opening up, and having a vivid feeling and a vivid thought process. It's like seeing the Red Sea part, but with people, so that we could drive through. We drove through this crowd of people and got to the other side of this sort of embankment, and it sort of opened up from that point. I remember clearly having an image of this small child on the other side of this embankment looking out, because everything is just in slow-mo. It doesn't add up. It's kind of, is this really happening? And I don't think because it's happening in real time and it's all happening so quickly, you're trying to process how is this happening and why is this happening. And it's such an interesting experience. But I just remember like it was almost like my whole life paused on the other side of this embankment as our cars were getting ready to move forward again. And I remember looking to the right of the vehicle and seeing this little girl at the top of a mound of rubbish. She must have been 3 or 4. And it was this huge pile of rubbish, like bigger than houses. It was just this mound of rubbish. It was like a rubbish tip. And she had a stick that was attached to a piece of plastic bag, a strip of plastic bag. And she'd made her own kind of self-made kite. She's standing on the top of this thing and she's just waving it in the air and she's just giggling and just full of joy as she's watching this piece of plastic just sort of taking off in the wind on the top of a rubbish pile. It's seared into my memory that here we are, this crazy situations going on all around us, and there's this little kid somehow in the mess and in the most manic situations has found her own place of play and has found her own place of escape with something that she's created out of rubbish. Up until that point, I just remember thinking, I'm going to die. And it's in this moment, this couple of minutes, it's sort of like things opened up again. It's like we're back in the game. We may actually get out of this.
One of the people that we had travelling with us was the Vice President of Compassion for that area. He originally was from Haiti, and I remember him getting out of the vehicle and trying to find a way ahead. And that was going to be difficult because there were people everywhere, as you say. The roads, or tracks really they were getting narrower. And he actually found someone who was prepared to show us a way. And of course, at that stage, we didn't know whether that was taking us to some of his friends around the corner who were then going to attack and rob, or whether he actually was leading us out of there. But we were told we had no choice. We had to move because staying where we were was dangerous. So we didn't know whether we were going to another danger or whether this was something that is going to see us to safety. And I remember we kept going slowly until we finally turned a corner. And there was a crew cab ute, and there were people on the back of that crew cab ute holding weapons. They had police vests on. And this gentleman who worked for Compassion, who was originally from Haiti, the image that is seared into my mind is him putting his hands up. He was a very big gentleman. And there he is with his arms outstretched way up in the air, walking towards these police very slowly so that they could see he had no ill intent. He explained the situation to them of what was going on. And it was then that they agreed to give us an armed escort to the airport. Another life-saving moment in that journey. And eventually we did get out of there. So in the midst of this turmoil of people who are rioting, not because they want to bring violence on anyone, but just because they could not feed their families. And we finally flew out of there. And the memory for me is going down that runway, looking out the window, seeing fires burning all the way around the capital of Haiti, where there had been barricades and riots and fire everywhere. And then in a surreal moment, looking down in the grass along the side of the runway, seeing kids playing soccer and taking off. And this sense in which I felt, finally, we're safe. And at the same moment thinking, but there are 8 million people living in Haiti who are never going to afford a ticket to get out of this place. They are trapped here. They're trapped into poverty. And I think for me, that was the moment I said, I've got to do more to tell the story of these people so that they don't have to continue to live this way.
I had exactly the same moment. I remember flying out and looking out the window of this plane. I remember running on the tarmac just to get on the plane. I remember getting on the plane and they didn't do any of the safety checks. It was just like, we got to get you out. I had this crazy, overwhelming sense that when I go home, I need to be a voice for those kids who do not have a voice. That was it. I remember being back. We'd been back for a week or so, and one of the girls from Compassion in Newcastle actually came up to the radio station to debrief, and she wanted to put on a morning tea and say thank you, and they wanted me to share a bit. And she shared about the moment that we were caught in the back streets of the slum where they were saying there's no way out. And she said, when we were in Compassion in Newcastle, we got a text from DJ, who was sort of the head of the team that took us over there, he had messaged and said, you need to pray for us now. We may not get out of this one. DJ's been on dozens of trips all over the globe, and he had personally felt that this one we may not get out of. And so she's sharing this experience from their end, like just on the compassion in the office kind of experience of this team. And she starts sharing, and she said, we started praying for your protection while we're still in the slum, like in that moment. They're praying. And she said that a lady in the office stood up on a chair and prayed, God, part the people like the Red Sea. And everything in me just went, that's exactly what happened. That's what I saw. That's the revelation I had when the people parted and we went through. I just was like, what did you just say? And it was, for me, a moment of a living God answering a prayer in real time on the other side of the world. Because of that revelation and that clarity of God working and moving in that moment, it just struck home a chord in my own heart again that, no, this is not me being crazy. I need to go and be a voice for these kids. Over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I tried to fit that call into my radio career. I tried to use that experience and go, okay, I'll do it through radio. But I knew my time was up. I think it must have been about 4 weeks after I went into my boss and said, here's my resignation. I need to go and share with teenagers about the world they live in and how they can actually change things for the better for kids that are in need. I just look at that and I just go, yep, life-defining moments.
The trip was certainly life-defining for everyone who was there, as you went on to work for Compassion for several years. Sometime later, I also left radio for 9 years to work with Compassion Australia. Even though I no longer work there, I still believe that Compassion's model of releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name is second to none. There are links in the show notes at bleedingdaylight.net to Compassion if you want to make a difference in the lives of others. While this story has focused on the very real danger we all faced, it was still insignificant compared to the stories of those who live in poverty and what they face daily. Thank you so much for talking today about our shared story.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for listening to Bleeding Daylight. Please help us to shine more light into the darkness by sharing this episode with others. For further details and more episodes, please visit bleedingdaylight.net.